This is episode 21, Letting Go of Resentment. Today, we're going to be talking about resentment and how it can control you to an extent and the effects that it has on relationships, in particular, relationships with parents. And one of the examples that family members really, one of the examples that I'm going to give you is the resentment that I realized that I had and was holding when I was a child to my younger brother. A lot of clients have come to me and we've worked together on things around the relationship between themselves and their parent for feeling like they were not treated and loved in the way that they felt that they needed to be, and felt that they deserved to be. And of course, like we all deserve to be loved in the way that we feel that we deserve to be loved in. For whatever reason, these clients, and I'm not going to exclude myself out of this. We feel we haven't had the experience, the loving experience that we thought we should have, and maybe that's come from as a comparison to other friends, experiences with their parents, and how we're observing those relationships outside of us and comparing them to the relationship that we have with our folks. Or maybe we just actually truly feel the yuck in the relationship that we have and the love that we've received from them. For me, with my parents in particular, I've realized and become aware of the it's possibly resentment, but there's a few more emotions around it than just resentment. But with my father, so with my dad, and largely laying, at least my conscious awareness that has started from when I was a baby and not having a baby photo. So something that small when I was born, when me and my siblings were born, both of my brothers had a professional photographer show up at the hospital to take photos of them. And my sister and we don't have that. We were told that there were photographers booked, but they didn't show up for whatever reason. And, I used to jest when I was little that, oh yeah, sure enough. Yeah, of course, the photographer didn't turn up for the two girls in the family. They didn't take their photos, but the boys have got their photos. Energetically. And I think my mum told me when I was an adult that when I was born, actually, it might have actually been in a reading that I had. So going a little bit more woo-woo than I normally would, but in a reading that I had with a psychic, and she told me that my dad he arrived and when I was born and had to quickly get back to work. So he was under pressure to get there, get my mum and myself home and get back to work. So there was a sense of and a feeling of not feeling loved and not feeling treasured as you would want to as a child, as a baby, as a newborn. And from that age through to 10, there's not a lot of memories there for me. I had a fall and bumped my head, and I only recently remembered that that's when I forgot a lot of things. But when I was going through my teens, I felt quite sick, and I've shared stories about this with you on other occasions. But I felt quite unwell, and my younger brother, a year or two after, also felt really unwell. So I was diagnosed with a chronic bowel condition, and my brother sadly was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And it wasn't until recently, so he recovered from that brain tumor, but sadly there was another one that developed, which he passed from when he was 18 and I was 19. So still going through my own health things at the same time as well. But it wasn't until recently, I think earlier this year, that I had an awareness that I actually held a lot of jealousy around my brother being sick. Because it was taking attention away of my parents' attention away from me. And I shared that with a friend, expressed like after I'd had this awareness, I was in a meditation and it came to me. And I shared it with a friend almost immediately afterwards as to how sick I felt that I was feeling jealous of my brother having a brain tumor because he was getting the attention that I was seeking through my own sickness, and how horrible a person that must make me, that I was resenting my brother. I went through a process, and the feelings that were coming up around that, processed those out and released those. But it's really not until you have a level of awareness around what is creating the resentment, but why, but more importantly, what part of you needs to hold it, that you're going to really start to be able to process the emotions around that. So, as far as relationships with parents are concerned, as I said, a fair number of my clients have come to me to work on their relationships with their parents, and they have been. Some of them have been as a result of the trauma existing has been because they were beaten. Some of them the traumas existed because there's been sexual abuse there. And some because, there was favoritism. There was favoritism between siblings, and it was really quite obvious and clear to that individual that that was the case. Or they were, treated unfairly in whatever way that was perceived by them. The One of the big things that I work with my clients on is being able to appreciate that that's what they know, that's what your parents know how to do, and that's what they have learned how to do. Perhaps they grew up with the ideology that they would be better than their own parents. But the learning that we've actually had. So for me, for example, becoming a parent, when and if that is, um, I will likely hold the ideology and the beliefs that I will be a better parent or than my parents, or love my children in this way because I feel and perceive that to be a better experience, or I will do such and such things with my child. But it's not until we're in those situations, it's not until we become a parent that we start to really see and live and breathe the subconscious programming that's already there that we've learned from our parents. We don't know what we will truly do in a stressful situation when our child runs out into the road, and there's a car, or you hear a car coming and you pull them back and give them a smack on the bum because you were scared. But you might think that, well, I would never do that. I would never do that to my child. But until you're in that moment, those subconscious programs are never going to surface. So there's an appreciation, or there's a level of appreciation, or learning to appreciate that your parents were doing the best job that they knew how to. In addition to that, it's coupled with the choice that we've made to be here, to experience them, and the choice that they've made to have us here to experience us. So my parents chose me and I chose them to have this life experience together. And in that choosing, we can grow, we can stay the same, or we can continue to just to repeat the patterns in the ways that we already knew them to exist. I would like to think that I've grown quite a lot. One of the things that I did quite early on in when I started to deepen my personal development activities, was when I first came across neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And when I trained in that as a practitioner, one of the things that I processed was my ability to communicate with my dad. So I was holding so much anger and resentment with my dad that I was unable to communicate with him clearly, and effectively, because I always felt like I was shut down. I always felt like my opinion didn't matter. And when I stopped sharing my opinion, I would get in trouble for not participating in a conversation. So there was a lot of anger, a lot of energy in the throat area that I could always feel when I was having a conversation with my dad and he was maybe getting a little bit debatey or argumentative, or he was a little bit annoyed. So I was feeling that quite it was very visceral in my body. Through this process, I'm using anchors and connecting that experience, that very physical, kinesthetic experience, and transforming it into, by pure accident, something that ended in a giggle. We used anchor points on the body to transform that energy into what was more joyful and what was more ease, what was more relaxed and confident in communication. I hadn't really practiced it or come across a situation where I needed to have a conversation with my dad in that same, with the same level of triggers until I actually moved to Australia. So I did my practitioner program a year before I moved out to Australia, I think. And when I came to Australia, there was a bit of a situation with my first niece's naming ceremony. And initially it was around the name itself. And so our names are chosen based on the astrological charts, the Vedic astrological charts. And there was a bit of a conflict is probably too harsh, but if I was in London in the midst of it, it probably was a conflict. But as an outsider looking in, it wasn't a conflict. There was disagreement certainly around what the letters were for the naming of my niece. And then afterwards, for the actual naming ceremony itself, some disagreement around the timing of it. So again, based on the astrological charts and the best time of day to do the naming ceremony, that's when it's conducted. My dad had told my mum what the time was. His expression of what the situation was, that he told my mum what time it was, and then it was held earlier, and he hadn't got home yet to participate. But what happened was, as a result of this change that I'd conducted and carried out in my physical body, in my emotional body, that when my dad was expressing himself to me, I was able to communicate with him in a completely calm and collected way. I was able to show him that I will say to him that perhaps my mum had not heard what he had said, and that next time, it's all done now, and that next time when he's communicating something that's important like that, just to check. On both instances, for the naming and also for the name itself, and then also for the time of the naming ceremony. And there was nothing more that my dad could say. It just was all very sound and logical. So there was no counter argument. And he just checked that I was okay, and then handed the phone back to the rest of my family. But my experience with that was, coming off the phone with him, I felt incredibly calm. I felt incredibly open. I felt incredibly peaceful as well, strangely. I had a chat with my sister just after, and I said to her that I've had the best, most productive conversation that I've ever had with my dad. This was at the age of 30, that I've ever had with my dad ever in my life. And I was on the other side of the planet when it happened. And all I could do was laugh at how amusing that was, at how good the conversation went. And my sister laughed as well. But it came as well from the appreciation that my dad, my mom, they're just all doing the best job that they know how to. They're trying the hardest that they know how to. And certainly since then, there's been a deeper level of appreciation around that, when I've explored feeling worthy or not feeling worthy, having not gotten married in my 20s, having not bought a house, having not had children yet, all of those things that define a woman in my culture, that you're married, your kids, you're a wife, you're a mother, and do all of the domestic things around the home. I wasn't any of that. So yeah, there's been still, and there still is, and it's all a journey of awareness. Anyway, so the big tool here for me to share with you is around awareness, because none of this happens without creating awareness around yourself, for yourself, around what is your external environment, which is a massive reflection of what's going inside going on inside you. The two questions, which are more or less the same, but slightly different and feed into or bring up slightly different information. The first one is, what part of you is holding on to it, onto this and the resentment? What part of you is holding on to the resentment? The reason it's framed that way, as opposed to why are you holding on to this resentment, is because we're not trying to attack ourselves. We're not trying to be in judgment. There's just an aspect of you that is holding that. And that aspect of you, then we're going to ask that bit, what part of you needs to hold onto the resentment? So this part of you that is holding on to the resentment, why does it need to hold on to the resentment? And again, through withholding judgment, not analyzing, it's simply asking the question, because when we ask the question, we're saying to our subconscious mind, to our higher self, that we're ready to receive this information. We're not going to go in there and try and dig it out, because then we're activating our conscious analytical mind and we start to create stories. We start to go into judgment. We start to go into the analysis part of ourselves and that monkey brain. We're simply asking the question and allowing the information to come to the surface. And it absolutely will. Every single time I ask a question that is nice and open and free of judgment, is from that place of grace, the information comes because I'm going to receive it from a very curious energy, from a very loving energy, because I want to let it go, because I want to be more love. I want to be more whole. I want to be more of me in my greatness. Let me know what comes up for you in your awareness to those two questions, and join me next week for episode 23, where we'll talk about loss and grief.